Trump administration is clearly on defense now over these proven attacks on free speech and confessions, admissions of improper motive by senior officials. The New York Times reporting there are now these measures to silence opponents that the White House wants to pursue. That would be un-American, full stop, but probably unconstitutional. We will see exactly what they try to do. But that Trump is pursuing them by invoking Kirk's killing. Tonight, there are clues about a new order Trump may push that would try to curb free speech. So this anti-speech agenda continues even as AG Bondi backtracked after admitting what I just mentioned, an unconstitutional goal of the government targeting free speech because they deem it offensive or they deem it hate speech. It's been a theme across this administration.
We will absolutely target you, go after you, if you are targeting anyone with hate speech, anything. And that's across the aisle.
We'll probably go after people like you because you treat me so unfairly. It's hate. You have a lot of hate in your heart.
To the extent that it's part of an organized effort to inflict harm and terror and damage to the United States, there's potential investigations there.
You just heard from the AG, the deputy AG, and the president. Two of those three people described illegal or unlawful goals for the government targeting speech. The final one, you'll notice, was worded more carefully, a reference to speech that might actually lead to violence. And if you get up to violence or right near it, as I'll explain, then yes, that's different. But Bondi was facing fact checks and a backlash from really all sides of the spectrum over her completely wrong claim that I just played for you. Murdoch's Wall Street Journal hitting a point we actually reported when we first heard Bondi's remarks, that she has now failed her First Amendment test in public, flat on her face. Now, that's also bad because this is the person who's supposed to uphold the First Amendment and the rest of the Constitution as the leader of the Justice Department. I'll read to you from the Journal. She doesn't have a basic understanding of the First Amendment. It protects words and speech, including expressions of hate, which are despicable, but not legal cause for prosecution. Trump allies also now calling for a kind of speech punishment regime. They're pressing companies to fire people who have said things they don't like about Mr. Kirk or others during this tough time. And while some of those things are completely terrible, we are witnessing, adjacent to what the government's doing, a kind of right-wing cancel culture run amok. And a contradiction of the same people, same MAGA leaders and pundits' complaints about what they called woke or supposedly liberal cancel culture. Now, I told you I'd tell you how this works under the law, not anyone's outside opinion, and here it is. The Supreme Court ruled in 1989, we made that year really large so you can see how long this stuff has been clearly established, that it's a bedrock principle of the First Amendment the government may not prohibit speech simply because it's offensive or disagreeable. That applies to most things that people would call hate speech. This is long settled. I'm going to take you back a little further really quick, back to the late 60s, when there were also serious tensions over politics of violence. Real problems in the country, but back then in 69, the Supreme Court noted that speech and peaceful words are protected all the way up to the line until speech that implies and incites and gets really into causing violence or lawless action. They called it imminent lawless action. If you know how lawyers are, I got Weissman standing by. That word imminent does a lot of work because talking about something that might be lawless next year is very different from trying to get someone to break the law right in front of you. For example, words designed to cause violence this very moment, or words designed to cause fraud this very moment. So these exceptions that I'm telling you about to free speech, they are narrow. They have been established for some time. As for the current court, Justice Sotomayor weighing in on this topic. Now, being very respectful, she's not naming names, but she refers, see if you can hear the Pam Bondi call out, she refers to lawyers who should know better, suggesting that there is a competence failure for any lawyer, which includes recently Bondi, who is pushing for jailing people for their constitutionally protected free speech.
The thing that gets to me is every time I listen to a lawyer-trained representative saying we should criminalize free speech in some way, I think to myself, that law school failed.
That law school failed, or that lawyer failed. And what if that lawyer does know better, but is still just saying the opposite of what the First Amendment holds because they want a DOJ that breaks the law or punishes free speech, or they want to please their boss. And that's some of the pushback. As we've noted, Bondi has backtracked, which is a sign of awareness that she's either in too much trouble or she got it wrong. But the president is not backtracking. That order I mentioned refers to political violence, but also is involved in efforts to go after people based on their viewpoints, which the First Amendment also protects. For example, trying to yank the legally justified tax-exempt status of groups because they're liberal nonprofits, or using anti-corruption laws specifically to target people based on their views or organization. Of course, you want the government to be against all corruption, but you don't want it to misuse that to chill or silence speech. Without the First Amendment, well, I couldn't be telling you this, and you couldn't be shouting back. You're welcome to disagree or add to anything that's being said in your media. But it is fundamentally what makes our elections free and fair. There are other countries that hold fake elections but punish free speech, jail dissidents, and those elections, frankly, ain't worth a damn. Your thoughts on what we just went through, including Trump officials admitting attacks on what seemed like viewpoint protection and free speech?
Yeah, I think obviously the assassination of Charlie Kirk is horrible and everybody should condemn political violence. But we don't want the administration to be using this tragedy as a way to go after protected speech. It does seem like they sort of said the quiet part out loud by saying they were going to go after hate speech, and they've Bondi and others have gotten a lot of blowback on this, and they should, frankly, because first of all, the conservatives and the Republicans have been the party that has often defended the protection of hate speech, which it's a little unclear what Bondi means when she talks about hate speech. It's commonly used to mean epithets or slurs based on race, religion, or gender.
She seems to mean people who have been hateful or extremely negative about specifically Donald Trump and his allies. They care less about card-carrying Republicans, and they seem to view even some criticism that we think is totally unairable and some that is still in the realm of politics as all, quote, hate speech to them.
Exactly, and I think that's what the importance is of the First Amendment and having First Amendment protections is you don't want the party that's in power to use an overly broad definition of hate speech or some other kind of unprotected speech to go after their perceived enemies or critics or to censor dissent or just general free expression. And so I don't think that she's referring to the traditional definition of hate speech when she talks about going after and punishing hate speech. And as you mentioned, hate speech has long been determined to be protected, fully protected by the First Amendment. And that's part of a broader principle that the First Amendment protects speech, even that's deeply offensive to some people or to most people. And it's sort of a cost of having a vigorous free speech, public discourse, and freedom of thought that I think we all think is extremely important. And so the idea that they're going to go out and just use this under the guise of targeting hate speech to just essentially try to punish people that have different viewpoints than they have or who criticize the Trump administration, that's completely against what the First Amendment, the central meaning of the First Amendment.
Andrew, the reports around the Trump order and the effort they want to wage this week is to go after people and groups based on their views, based on their beliefs. Is that a First Amendment problem?
Yeah, well, that's going to be struck down. And this is not the first time for this administration. Let's just take the 4 executive orders with respect to law firms. All 4 were struck down on First Amendment grounds. So this would be yet another instance of that. And the irony of this is, let's just go back to this president on the ellipse on January 6th saying essentially that if we don't, stand up and fight for our country, we won't have it anymore. I'm just paraphrasing.
Yeah, fight like hell.
And when he was charged criminally, he attacked that indictment saying that violates the First Amendment. and saying that it hadn't crossed the line, the one that you had talked about to being sort of imminent and inciting. And Jack Smith was actually fairly careful to not charge the ellipse speech for that reason.
Right.
Because of the concern about the First Amendment, and that line is so important because people should be free to voice their views even when they're despicable, until and unless it gets to that sort of imminent violence. And that was something that Donald Trump embraced as a defense in his own criminal cases. Now the shoe's on the other foot, and they're really using it as a weapon, not a shield.
Yeah. President Obama spoke out about this, and while he is known for his equanimity, a word you might use, he didn't just say the fundamentals, although he did, and we condemn all political violence, and we need to have free and fair debate in this country. But then he also used this platform, knowing the environment we're in, to reference facts about how Donald Trump has spoken and discussed politics. Take a look.
When I hear not just our current president, but his aides, who have a history of calling political opponents vermin, enemies, who need to be targeted, that speaks to a broader problem that we have right now, and something that we're going to have to grapple with, all of us.
Today we heard from the former director of the CDC for the first time since she was fired, just 29 days after being confirmed by the Senate. Susan Menarez, who was chosen and nominated by Donald Trump, testified before the Senate Health Committee about how she was fired for, quote, holding the line on scientific integrity, telling senators about the meeting with Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. that ultimately led to her dismissal.
On the morning of August 25th, Secretary Kennedy demanded two things of me that were inconsistent with my oath of office and the ethics required of a public official. He directed me to commit in advance to approving every ACIP recommendation, regardless of the scientific evidence. He also directed me to dismiss career officials responsible for vaccine policy without cause. He said if I was unwilling to do both, I should resign. I responded that I could not pre-approve recommendations without reviewing the evidence, and I had no basis to fire scientific experts. He told me he had already spoken with the White House several times about having me removed. I told the secretary that if he believed he could not trust me, he could fire me. The next day, I was told I still had my job, but the secretary's expectations remained: approval of ACIP recommendations and dismissal of career scientists. I would not commit to that, and I believe it is the true reason I was fired.
Senator Bernie Sanders, independent from Vermont, is a ranking member of the Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions Committee, which held today's hearing, and he joins me now. Senator, I knew the outlines of this story. Of course, we covered it. It was reported. I found the testimony today truly shocking. What Ms. Menarez detailed. What was your reaction?
Well, I think it was shocking, and I think two major issues popped out at me, Chris. Number one was the ferocity upon which the Kennedy people are prepared to undermine the science of vaccines. Her great crime, and the reason she was fired, as she just said, is she didn't pre-approve a set of principles that she had not seen, okay, regarding vaccines. Now, why these people want to defy what every major medical organization believes, what every scientific organization believes, which is that not only are vaccines safe and effective, they have saved millions and millions of lives. So I honestly do not understand why they want to break the people's trust in vaccines. And by the way, as we discussed at the hearing, what I fear about is not only what happens for our kids today and in the immediate future. Most of the scientists believe that another pandemic is coming. They don't know what it will look like. They don't know when it will be. And what Kennedy is doing is making it very difficult for us to prepare for that pandemic, which, God forbid, could take millions of lives. The second issue that popped out of me today was the authoritarian nature of what Kennedy and his people do. You hire somebody to be head of the CDC, one of the most important public health officials in America, and then you say, it doesn't matter what you think.
Right.
This is what we will tell you. We are politicians. You do what we want. You don't want to do it, you are out of here. Those are the things that popped up to me today.
Not only that, I mean, she told your colleague, Senator Cassidy, who, sort of hemmed and hawed and reluctantly voted for Kennedy, even though he's a doctor, and now seems to be having a little buyer's remorse, that they're going to change the childhood vaccine schedule, like for the whole country, and that book is already cooked. The fix is in.
Well, we will see what happens tomorrow. Their meeting is tomorrow. But the idea that you fire all of the people who are on that committee and you bring in people who are vaccine skeptics is rather extraordinary. So what we are looking at, Chris, and this is the point that everyone has got to understand, every medical organization in America representing hundreds and hundreds of thousands of doctors, the AMA, the pediatrics people, the osteopaths, all of the major organizations understand the importance of vaccines. And you have people involved in conspiracy theory trying to undermine the trust the American people have.
I want to just read to you, this is Robert Malone, who is one of these individuals who has been appointed to this committee that is going to determine the childhood vaccine, the one whose recommendations were that Ms. Menarez was, or Dr. Menarez was supposed to just approve sight unseen. This is him watching the hearing today, saying the CIA trains people how to lie and manipulate others. That is a fact. Has she been trained to lie by our intelligence community? Like, this is one of the people that's going to be making the child vaccine recommendations.
What can I tell you? I wish I could tell you it's unbelievable. That is what's going on in Washington right now. This is the kind of person you have who will be determining policies to protect the health of Americans' kids. I mean, that's basically nuts.
Since I have you here, you have long talked a lot about the U.S. media, about how the media operates and controlled, and particularly its ownership and the threats that can pose to the free and fair expression of a range of views. So I have to get your reaction to the FCC commissioner directly threatening both local affiliates and Disney earlier today, saying we can do it the easy way or the hard way, and then subsequently both the affiliates and then Disney deciding to preemptively take Jimmy Kimmel off the air.
Look, I mean, you've heard me say this a million times. This country is rapidly moving toward an authoritarian form of society. In authoritarian countries like Russia and others, Saudi Arabia, you do not have a media that is allowed to be critical of the government. Trump just, what was it yesterday, the day before, announced a $50 billion lawsuit against the New York Times. Today, the head of the FCC basically says, I don't like what this guy said, and we can take away your license. You better get rid of him. So this is just another step forward, and we have got to, some of us are working really hard to rally the American people, not only against this authoritarianism, but this war against the working class, the massive tax breaks for the rich, the cuts in Medicaid. People should be aware that as a result of this Trump's big, beautiful bill, your health care premiums, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, whatever, independent, could go up by 75% because they're taking away the credits for the ACA. Yeah. So, we got some crises. We're trying to rally the American people against oligarchy, against authoritarianism, against the war on the working class that we're currently seeing.
Senator Bernie Sanders, thank you for making time tonight.
Thank you, Chris.
President Trump's historic second state visit to the UK has been marked by next-level pomp and circumstance inside the walls of Windsor Castle and royal fury outside of those walls. The president and the first lady are expected to arrive soon at St. George's Hall for a state banquet to cap off a full day of events, including the UK's largest military ceremony for a foreign leader in living memory. And yet, for all the honor inside those walls, outside there was a crush of protest, including images intended to provoke. 4 people were arrested for projecting a stinging 9-minute video montage onto the walls of Windsor Tower, laying out a timeline of allegations tying Donald Trump to pedophile Jeffrey Epstein.
1997. Trump and Epstein are seen together at 2 Victoria's Secret parties and are photographed together at Mar-a-Lago. The same year, Trump gifts a book to Epstein with the dedication, "To Jeff, you are the greatest, Donald."
Joining us now, President Emeritus of the Council on Foreign Relations and author of the weekly Substack newsletter, Home and Away, Richard Haass, and Vanity Fair columnist and former managing editor of the Sunday Times in London, Clive Irving. Clive, it is your country. Tell me what it is like there right now, because, boy, is there a difference between what is inside the castle walls and what is happening outside.
Yeah, it's crossed the line in a sense for many people in Britain that the royal family has been used in this way. I think meeting the needs of a vainglorious president has been successful today. I think they've laid everything on and reflected glory, all the pomp and circumstance, the military connections, the fly past, all of that can be judged as success. But the agonizing question for many Brits is it worth it? Now, the government argues we had to keep on the right side of President Trump, and by doing so from the start, by promising this state visit, we've done better than almost any other country in preserving the damage that could be done by tariffs, also much beyond tariffs, building up or keeping safe and secure the essential security and intelligence interaction and interdependence of the 2 countries. Never mind the thing about special relationship. I mean, I think that's a kind of very tired thing. It's a very practical, almost you could say pragmatic and cynical decision that at all costs, both countries need to be close together and have to prevent Trump from making that situation unpredictable. And so I think at the end of this day, they've succeeded that, but at a tremendous cost. And for me, as an observer of the royal family, I must say I have very almost emetic feelings about what I've seen today, in that such a whole roll-up of, if you like, Rule Britannia and all its apparatus devoted solely to a person who has not respected so many things about the core values of Great Britain.
Interestingly, Richard, you are seeing those protests outside of the walls again in London. But over the weekend, there was also a really large protest, and it was bigger than this, an anti-immigration protest, a pro-Britain protest, you could call it, I guess, arguably, a nationalist protest. People were wearing Trump hats and holding Trump signs in that protest. Donald Trump might not be the majority, but Donald Trump has inspired something there and inspired something certainly across Europe since his rise that has only been elevated since he was able to regain the White House.
No, absolutely, Katie. What we're seeing is versions of Trumpism, essentially populism, a kind of radicalism, anti-status quo, tends to be anti-immigrant in many cases. We're seeing it in Britain, we're seeing it in France, Germany, and so forth. So sure, I mean, in some ways modeled on his success here. My hunch is we're going to see more of it, given the kinds of economic challenges, in particular, we're seeing in Europe, that you can't simply produce economic growth. And I expect we're going to see more, not less of this. That's going to be the challenge for European politics. You'll have this radical right, the reform movement in Britain. You'll have a kind of old, somewhat tired left. And the question is there a center? Is there anything that's a true conservative? I'm not so sure. Let me say about the trip, I'm a little bit more generous. I actually think this is a kind of a calculated move by the British government. They disagree with the Trump administration profoundly on policy about Gaza and the Middle East, about Ukraine and Russia, about tariffs. And I think what's happening is they're essentially, it's almost like an insurance premium. They're paying this premium up front to assuage the American president to try to have him see Britain in a fairly benign way. And it seems to me a kind of calculated decision. They're not giving up anything on the policy side, so it takes a day or two of pomp and circumstance. And I think from their point of view, and in some ways it also insulates the government from it. It's using the royal family to signal this, a kind of closeness, a traditional tie between the countries, and all things being considered, as insurance premiums go, it was probably less expensive, shall we say, than the alternatives.
Interesting. Richard Haass, Clive Irving, thank you very much, gentlemen. I appreciate it.
Today on Capitol Hill, members of Congress letting the administration know how they feel about their handling of the Epstein files and all of that. How long can this FBI file or the FBI hide behind this idea that the courts, I got all of these, these courts out here telling me I got to stay, I got to wait. It sounds a little bit like sort of a BS game to me. Yeah. But you've been inside the tent. Tell us what that means.
Well, that's exactly what this administration wants, which is for everybody to give up and forget about the Epstein scandal. And that's what those court orders or the seeking the court orders were meant to do. They were trying to lose in court and get a court order saying, no, you can't disclose information about the Jeffrey Epstein investigation. And in that regard, they were entirely successful. They went to 3 separate courts. They lost 3 separate times. The problem for Kash Patel, the problem for this entire administration, though, is there's a whole bunch of information that could still be released by this FBI, by this DOJ. Representative Dan Goldman, who's a former federal prosecutor in New York, in the hearing today had a really good suggestion, which is release the interview transcripts outside of the grand jury proceedings. Those aren't protected by Federal Rule of Criminal Procedure 6E. That's something that they could give up. But this administration doesn't want to.
We actually have that sound from Dan Goldman. Let's play it now.
We are providing everything we can legally provide.
No, that's not my question. My question is, why are those witness statements that are not grand jury testimony, that if they were under a protective order are no longer under a protective order, why are they not being released?
How are they not under a protective order?
Why are you not going to the court like you did for the grand jury testimony to unseal those records?
The DOJ did go to the court.
No, not on those records. Why aren't you going? You just went on grand jury.
Time of the gentleman has expired.
You are hiding the Epstein files, Mr. Patel.
Time of the gentleman has expired.
You are part of the cover-up.
Okay, we're talking, when we say the Epstein files, we're talking about 100,000 pages worth of documents. When you are talking about that grand jury testimony, you're talking about 70 pages of information. So what is it that Kash, I get what he thinks he's getting away with. He thinks we're all too dumb to do the math, to tell the difference between the grand jury and the court order and all the rest of it. I actually think America is so invested in this story. And I think the fact that you have not only Democrats, but also Republicans like Massey pushing on this means that there is an appetite. If they wanted to do this, what would it actually look like? If they wanted real transparency.
You're exactly right. So what Kash Patel and this administration were seeking court orders to release were, as you said, a tiny sliver of information. That was the testimony that was in front of the grand jury. But as you said, there are tens of thousands, probably hundreds of thousands of documents that weren't presented to the grand jury that wouldn't be covered by those rules. And it seems like Director Patel is trying to obfuscate and try to get people confused about those two things. But I also think that there's a broader point here, which is, on just about every other law, this administration seems like they're above it. They don't hesitate to fire FBI officials even when it breaks civil service protections. They're not afraid to target people for protected speech. But somehow, this magical rule.
They want to be by the book.
They want to by the book. Exactly. This one
the court
thing
told us we got to. This
wait.
is when they respect the court.
These are law-abiding citizens, guys. Come on now. What would make you think otherwise? There were a lot of exchanges today, and I will note, we were kind of talking about this before the show. I have been thinking about all day that Kash Patel was notably more subdued today with the House Judiciary Committee than he was with the Senate Judiciary Committee. If you think about it, he was still boisterous, a little boisterous, but yesterday he was yelling over over senators. Everything they said, he was pointing at them. You're coming directly at me. Today, it was a little more demure. And to me, that says that performance yesterday was actually not necessarily welcomed by the White House. It looked as though to me that he, because if you're that boisterous, it's like you got something to hide.
Well, he might have just been tired. But putting that aside, I watched yesterday, and I thought, as we see in the Trump administration, he was performing for an audience of one. Yeah. Fox News put out a story on Monday, where they cited 10 anonymous sources in the administration saying that he was on the ropes, that Pam Bondi wants him out, that the White House doesn't like his performance, what he did with the Charlie Kirk investigation didn't help him. And so it seems to me in this administration, if you have a problem and you think they're coming for you, there's only one person who you care about. So he went after Adam Schiff yesterday, the senator who ran the House Intelligence Committee when they did the first Trump impeachment. And we know how much Trump hates Adam Schiff. So he made sure to lacerate him. And I think that was just all performative. We've never seen an FBI director behave this way. The guy who's supposed to be in charge of the premier law enforcement agency of this nation, getting out there and deriding members of Congress and not just disagreeing, but insulting them. I mean, so he was doing that, I think, purposefully. Maybe in the end, it didn't work. Maybe the White House said, too much, ratchet back. But that's clearly what he was doing. It was clearly a moment of desperation, which is not what you want to see in an FBI director.
Among the most essential responsibilities of any government is the health and well-being of its people. It is why today's hearing in front of the Senate's Health Committee was so important to all of us. And yet, most of the time, so deeply disturbing. The witnesses, Susan Minares, she is now the former head of the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, and Deborah Oury, the agency's former chief medical officer, who abruptly resigned after Minares was fired by Donald Trump a few weeks ago at the behest of Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. In fact, it was that firing that was under the microscope at today's hearing. Specifically, an August 25th meeting between RFK Jr. and Dr. Minares, in which Dr. Minares testified that Kennedy asked she commit in advance to essentially rubber stamping every recommendation of the CDC's vaccine advisory panel, quote, regardless of scientific evidence, in addition to firing certain officials responsible for vaccine policy. Here's what Kennedy said about that same meeting 2 weeks ago and how Minares responded today.
I told her that she had to resign because I asked her, are you a trustworthy person? And she said no. So if you had an employee who told you they weren't trustworthy, would you ask them to resign, Senator?
So I'm sorry, but this is not what she has said publicly. She has said
I'm not surprised about that.
So you're saying she's lying?
Yes.
Regarding trustworthiness, I cannot define that word for Secretary Kennedy. I made commitments to this committee that I would lead with integrity, transparency, purpose, and work with Congress to maximize health outcomes and protect the American people. Secretary Kennedy told me he could not trust me. I had refused to commit to approving vaccine recommendations without evidence, fire career officials without cause, or resign, and I had shared my concerns with this committee. I told the secretary that if he believed he could not trust me, he could fire me.
So there you have it. He said, she said, if you will. But perhaps even more concerning than Kennedy firing her is why he fired her, why that meeting happens in the first place, what exactly Kennedy was asking Minares to do. Here's one example.
We got into an exchange where I had suggested that I would be open to changing childhood vaccine schedules if the evidence or science were supportive. And he responded that there was no science or evidence associated with the childhood vaccine schedule. And he elaborated that CDC had never collected the science or the data to make it available related to the safety and efficacy.
To be clear, he said there was not science or data, but that you still expected you to change the schedule.
Correct.
The This afternoon, there's brand new reporting in the Washington Post entered into the record during today's hearing. It casts new light on a prior meeting between Kennedy and Dr. Manaras on August 19th. From that Post report, quote, all major CDC policy decisions need prior political approval, a top aide to Kennedy told Manaras a week before her ouster. In an August 19th email to Manaras, which was obtained by the Post and has not been previously reported, Matthew Buckham, chief of staff at DHS, wrote this, quote, I wanted to elevate the absolute need for political review of major policy decisions at CDC, end quote. He added that Kennedy's office and CDC political leadership should, quote, have eyes on the decisions for approval changes before they go into effect, end quote. In the end, today's crucial testimony highlighted concerns all too common these days in America, an emphasis from the government on loyalty over science and expertise, the gutting of crucial federal agencies that keep all of us and our children safe, and a political party in MAGA less concerned with the actual issues at hand than the so-called anti-Trump lawyers representing the whistleblowers who bring it to light. It's where we start today with some of our favorite experts and friends and reporters. New York Times health policy and politics reporter Cheryl Gay Stolberg is here. Also joining us, host of the Fast Politics podcast, Vanity Fair special correspondent, MSNBC political analyst Molly Jong-Fast is here. Cheryl, I said he said, she said facetiously. It's he said, she said, and the entire scientific community agrees with her. What, at a big picture level, was today about?
You know, I went into today's hearing looking for signs of how Secretary Kennedy leads his agency. I think that the basic facts around Dr. Manaras' firing were kind of already out there. She had written an opinion piece in the Wall Street Journal saying what you just reported, that, you know, he wanted her to fire top scientists and that he wanted her to accept without question forthcoming recommendations from his handpicked panel of vaccine advisors, even without seeing the scientific evidence. What really struck me was the description that she offered of a private meeting between her and Kennedy and some of Kennedy's top deputies, where she said he was very, very upset and animated. He accused the CDC of being a corrupt agency, of being, you know, a tool of the pharma industry, of killing children. And I just found that to be kind of just a vivid look into what it feels like to work for Secretary Kennedy. And mind you, this is a woman who the Secretary himself said had impeccable scientific credentials. He promoted her to be CDC director, and, you know, then 29 days later, he ushered her out the door.
It's an extraordinary thing to hear you say, as a journalist so expert in this. He accused the CDC of killing children. Especially with all the science pointing that there are kids dying in America of measles, again, an eradicated disease. Let me play some of this testimony you're describing, though, so all of our viewers can hear it for themselves.
He made another set of assertions associated with CDC that were particularly pointed and particularly hurtful and disparaging. He called, in that context, CDC the most corrupt federal agency in the world. Emphasized that CD employees were horrible people. He had said that, I'm sorry. He said that CDC employees were killing children and they don't care. He said that CDC employees were bought by the pharmaceutical industry. He said CDC forced people to wear masks and social distance like a dictatorship. And the one I think that hurt me the most was a particularly vivid phrase he said during the COVID outbreak. CDC told hospitals to turn away sick COVID patients until they had blue lips before allowing them to get treatment.
And it is fair to say, in your view, that those statements are not true.
Those statements are not true.
To your broader point, I think, Cheryl, what we as Americans right now, regardless of for whom we cast our vote or if we didn't cast one at all, the man in charge of our children's vaccine schedules, our access to insurance-covered vaccines, and every decision about our health that is in the hands of an advisory board or an approver or an insurance agency. It's a sliver of the 1% who can make all their own healthcare decisions and pay for it. The rest of us are in the hands of some aspect of the federal government. And the person in charge of all of those things describes the people in one of the most vital agencies he leads as, quote, horrible people. He describes it as the, quote, most corrupt agency and says it's an agency that's killing children. I want to show you something else that came up today. It was about 180 rounds being fired into the CDC building and the trauma that brought about. This is Senator Murphy.
180 rounds being fired into the CDC. What a traumatizing event. Do you fear for the safety of the CDC and of medical personnel if these beliefs about the CDC actually recommending things that hurt people continue to become mainstream?
I do worry about that. I myself was subject to threats, and I am very concerned that the further promulgation of misleading information will undermine not just the safety and health of our children, but it will also exacerbate some of these tensions, the willingness to commit harm if someone is affronted by a belief that the people like us that are trying to help them are actually not trying to help them.
And I would just say it was 500 rounds. It was 180 that hit the building.
180 hit the building.
Now, each bullet was meant for a person. And each of my staff were very traumatized afterwards. I had staff that were covering their kids in the daycare parking lot. There were people that were out at the ride share as bullets were passing over their head. I have many that won't speak about vaccines now and have removed their names off of papers. They don't wish to present publicly anymore because they feel they were personally targeted because of misinformation.
Cheryl, your thoughts?
You know, it's interesting that you played that clip, Nicole, because that's exactly where my mind was going when we talked about his accusations. You know, I've been around a lot of people in public health at the federal, state, and local level, and they are not going into government public health jobs to get rich. Most of them have a really strong social conscience. They have a sense of mission, and I think that it is particularly painful for them, as Dr. Oury said, for the secretary to be accusing them of these things in the aftermath of this grievous tragedy at CDC headquarters, which took the life of a police officer. And one thing that I was really struck by was that Dr. Menares said that the secretary did not call her to express his condolences after that August 8th shooting. And I might note that President Trump, I do not believe, has ever addressed it either. And Menares said that the next time she spoke to him was when he came down and toured the agency on August 11th, 3 days later. So, you know, I think this was a very painful time for these employees. But more than that, there's a huge concern about trust and who can you trust? What do American parents listen to when, you know, the HHS secretary is firing the CDC director and accusing the agency of being corrupt?